But Tony, let's switch to you for a second and, kind of talk us through the measuring of NTRK fusions. We talk about mutations and amplifications, and now we have fusions. And I know for a lot of oncologists, me included, there's been a learning curve of what this is all about. So maybe walk us through some of that background.
But when we talk about these alterations that affect the NTRK pathway, and they go into this big bucket, a very small proportion are fusions. Actually, about 14% of tumors, up to 14% of tumors, will have a mutation, amplification, or alteration. The question is, of course, how important are the non-fusions in terms of promoting oncogenesis? And that comes with a question mark. The fusions seem to be drivers. Not as much is known about the mutations and amplifications, other than the fact that, for example, the presence of an NTRK mutation could be a driver for resistance for targeting these NTRK fusions, meaning it could be an escape mechanism. There are some agents actually that are more globally tackling, at least in early development, both the fusion, the mutation, and so pan targeting that may actually have an advantage versus those that target just specifically the fusions. But for now, most of our understanding is really linked to the fusions and the roles in oncogenesis and targeting them. Less is known about the others and targeting them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the GI guys can gather together. So Shub, jump in on this, but at least in our world, we're doing a lot of MSI testing. And we see when, whether it's PD-L1 or MSI, those are in a colorectal cancer world where we often see the NTRK fusions. And I was wondering, I've always just thought this is because there's just a lot of shrapnel around with an MSI setting. And so you're going to more likely have one of these fusions. What's your take on that, Shub? Do you think they're running together?
You're right. So the issue with, again, one of these NTRK fusions is it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And, as you know, I'm in two departments in MD Anderson and ICT, which is the phase 1 and in GI medical oncology. So a lot of my actually patients on some of the NTRK inhibitors have been on the phase 1 side when we were just introducing them, and they were 3 or 4 years back when we were really seeing the early responses to the NTRK inhibitors. So we always ask this question in different meetings. People always ask us, there's such a small percentage, why look at them? But where we can really enrich them, you're exactly right. So in the MSI high population colorectal cancer, they can have a higher percentage, and that's a relative term, of these NTRK fusions. So small pathology studies which were done in patients who had NTRK fusions, about as much as 75% of them were also MSI high. So I think this kind of MSI high group really has the two agnostic approvals, right, for the immunotherapy and for NTRK fusions, which is very interesting.
And then you find them in the same patient. Luis, what's your all's take in lung cancer? Are you seeing this kind of overlap with some of your all's molecular targets, or are you still got your nice pie chart where everybody's in their own wedge?
No, we are very fortunate that in lung cancer, we have several molecular targets. The problem is that, for example, for squamous cell carcinoma, a lot of targets don't have drugs yet. And what I want to add also about this conversation, what Tony was mentioning before, is something very practical for the audience. These NTRK mutations, they get reported all the time, and sometimes even the amplifications. For example, our site was one of the original accrual sites for LOXO-101 larotrectinib, and was the only site in South Florida. There's a lot of community people used to send me patients to accrual in the study, but they didn't notice that an NTRK mutation is not an NTRK fusion and is not an NTRK amplification. As much as I know, even with entrectinib, there is data that have people treated with NTRK mutations and NTRK amplifications, and they don't have a response. So that's why I think it's a very important practical point. We only treat NTRK fusions unless it's a patient with a fusion that has progressed and is now the mutation originating resistance. As you said, as clinicians, we are learning very fast about all of these things.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because lots of us have sent off molecular tests on our patients, say a year or two ago, and they're still sitting scanned into the back of our EMRs. And we think we might have done this test, for example, when in fact we were looking at either, protein or mutation data and not looked at the fusion. And as I think somebody else said, unless it's the fusion, the medicines aren't really working. So it sometimes justifies retesting.
Yeah, I mean, the mutations again are invoke resistance to these agents, and so in many ways, the presence of the mutations not only does not predict for a response, but also predicts for resistance. Yeah. It's interesting when you look actually at the tumor mutational burden overall, because we always think that these alterations, these fusions, are always present or co-expressed with a number of different alterations, whether with cell cycle associated tyrosine kinase, MAPK, PI3K. So you can find a lot of co-localization. You find PD-L1 expression about 20%, MSI high about 20-30%. So you find a lot, but the tumor mutational burden actually overall is lower for the NTRK fusion related or driven tumors versus those that are not. Right. So although they co-locate, they're not necessarily loaded with mutations as much as initially thought, at least.
So that's
that
great.
was my,
Mark.
That was my point below. We typically see, and I don't know that we know as much as we need to know about the NTRK lung population, but if you look at other fusion sorts of things, they tend to occur in the never light smokers, almost always adenocarcinoma. They almost always have low PD-L1, they have low infiltrating lymphocytes and tumors and that sort of thing. And we largely ignore PD-L1 status. If you diagnose a driver, the use of targeted therapy in a driver setting is so much more effective than what we understand immunotherapy to be in this setting. So we largely ignore PD-L1 in the population, but it's so infrequent in lung cancer, I still think we're learning.
Yeah, I think that's true too.